My name is Seraphina, the Masked Lady. I was once human. Since then, I have lived many lives. I have been loved and reviled, adored and despised, been the child of a poor prostitute and a courtesan revered by thousands. When I was a child, a stranger with no face offered me the ability to move between the worlds. Since then, my every death has led to a new life. I once had a true love. He was ripped away from me when I was murdered in the 18th century. I search for him still. In the meantime, I walk in the shadows behind the universe, visiting realms both exquisite and terrible and bringing back stories and rhymes to amaze the mind and enchant the ear. Through my YouTube channel, I send the stories out into the world, hoping that my true love will hear them and reply. Hoping, if he does not, that I will find in the other souls who listen kindred spirits to help ease the pain. What of you, stranger? Did you come here tonight seeking a mystery? Do you hunger for a spark of excitement, for the dark thrill of fear? Will you listen as my tales unfold, knowing that some may very well take on lives of their own? Consider, stranger, whether you have the courage to walk between the worlds with Seraphina, the Masked Lady. Good evening, my delicious darlings. How are you doing on this chilly night? November is with us now, and the nights are getting colder. On the downside, that means that we have to dig out our coats and jumpers. On the upside, we have even more time to listen to spooky stories. I have been searching hard for a new story for you this week. I was in a library behind the 7th universe when I came across this tale. It is about a woman who didn't get everything she wanted in life, but who managed to live a marvelous life nonetheless. The woman is called Mrs. Keen. Ginny to her friends, and the story takes place just after her death, when Ginny faces some entirely unexpected challenges. Will Ginny Keen find her way to heaven? The only way to find out is to listen. The life and death of Mrs. Keen. The wind is thunderous tonight. It's just past Halloween. And as I sit warm in my bed, I think of Mrs. Keen. Mrs. Keen was lovely and brave, the sweetest woman born. Her laugh was like a babbling brook, her eyes like a spring storm, and such a kind and gentle heart as has seldom been seen. Every child in Sleepy Hollow adored Ginny Keen. When she was young, Mrs. Keen had been a pretty lady, who always was surrounded by a merry company. A dozen men or more had said they'd gladly take her hand. But Ginny Keen only had eyes for a single young man. She'd sworn her troth to Henry Tobe when they were just 14. When she had seen their future mapped in a beautiful dream, her heart, her trust, and all her love she had given to him, she swore to herself every night that she would marry him. Mrs. Keen loved all children, the bigger ones and the small. She wanted many of her own. Till then she loved them all. Sadly, a war began, and Henry had to go away. A letter in yellow arrived at Ginny's door one day. People on the street saw Ginny gasp and then start to cry. Henry had been deathly injured. He wrote to say goodbye. Sadly, Ginny was not to see young Henry Tobe again. He died abroad and was buried with many other men. Ginny could have had another, but her heart decided it wouldn't pass to other hands but tarry with the dead. Despite her loss, bitterness didn't devour Mrs. Keen. She could have been a misery, spiteful, nagging, and mean. Instead, she adopted children with paws of various hues. Mrs. Keen never was bored. She just had too much to do. Yes, sometimes she was lonely, and sometimes she even cried, longing for her dear beloved back from the other side. But Mrs. Keen had a talent for remaining happy. In Sleepy Hollow, she lived to be a full 93. She was curled up warmly inside the night she passed away, sitting in her soft red armchair, her hands folded to pray. Her dear spirit had just left hold of her tired body. Her path should have been paved with gold, direction heavenly. But Mrs. Keen had done so much good in her humble day. The Prince of Lies lusted to snatch her gentle soul away. So Mrs. Keen woke on a park bench in a vast green glade. She looked around and frowned, wondering what mistake she'd made. She'd heard that she should be in a field beside a bright river, or inside heaven's gates while Henry pelted towards her. Still, the bench was comfortable, and she could hear birdsong. Later, she thought, is time enough to go where I belong? So, just as always, she prepared to take good from the bad. Looking around, she listed the many good things she had. Fresh air was in her once tired lungs, the sun was on her back. Her muscles, joints, and bones no longer shuddered fit to crack. She felt almost as she had done when a girl of 19, when her whole life had been before her ready to be dreamed. Ginny Keene thought perhaps someone would come to collect her. Instead, the afternoon came. Soon, night washed in around her. A chill invaded her bones and left her hands trembling. Lost, with nowhere that she could go, Ginny began to sing. The pretty tune wound through the air and around the dark trees. It chased away some of the shadows. Sadly, she still sneezed. Her agitation became worse as time crept slowly by. Then from somewhere in the darkness, there came an anguished cry, followed by a sound almost like two old men whispering. Another rose, like a cold and hungry infant crying. Another came, then one more. Things sprang up all round, until Ginny could barely breathe beneath the awful sound. If she had known a place to go, she would have run away. But she was lost in a strange place and so could only stay. Ginny had not one inkling of what was happening, until, between the darkened trees, she saw a gleaming grin, and then two slitted, glowing eyes followed by many more. Ginny closed her eyes, and she prayed God would cede to her more courage than she already had. Her legs were trembling. She couldn't help thinking of the sharp teeth in the pale grin. Two slitted eyes appeared, followed by another a second more. Soon she could make out shambling forms and gleaming, upraised claws. Alone, at night and without help, with nowhere to run to. Ginny's mind raced, but she could not think about what to do. Since she had left her body behind, she must now be dead. She'd hoped for heaven, but current events here suggested some sin concealed inside her past had dragged her down to hell. Her soul sorrowed to think this was the place that she must dwell. If that was the case, the hulking monsters around her could break from the tree line any instant and do what they would to her poor, undefended flesh. Still, Ginny meant to fight. She had no weapons or armor, but she could at least bite. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wondered just what she had done. To be thrown to demons, bound away from God and the sun. As if the things had heard her thought, laughter burst from around where Ginny stood. She raised her chin and called towards the sound. "Tell me, why are you stalking a woman in this dark place? Come out if you plan to rise and let me see your face." Giggles surrounded her again. She said, "I will see you. By he who formed the heavens and the earth, I order you." They didn't like that. The things hissed. They trembled and they screamed. Limbs flailed, eyes blinked, and spittle drooled. Ginny watched, and it seemed, while they didn't want to come forth, they were now compelled to. So, sneaking through the twisted tree line came the slinking crew. Ginny saw she hadn't been wrong to them as demons name. The things were twisted brown and gray, some pale, some limbs aflame. In form as various as hue, they hunched and tripped and sped. And the green earth beneath them cringed away as if disgusted. Mrs. Keene watched her heart in her throat, swallowing her fear. She'd summoned the monsters, and now she would be paying dear. Still, she stood tall and lifted her chin towards the starless sky. "You'll be disappointed," she said, "if you would see me cry. I know what you are, and I know you've come to injure me. But whatever you mean to do, I'll endure it bravely." The nearest wrinkled, oily shadow slashed a claw at her. Mrs. Keene flinched, and the thing made a sound just like a purr. A voice spoke from amidst the throng, mocking insolently.
"This is a way station. Someone is coming here, lady, to collect you and then lead you to heaven's high gate. Sadly for you, when they get here, they'll find they are too late. You are a tasty morsel, and our mouths will enjoy you. Our prince gave us permission to do just what we wish to. What's left of you We will render into our master's hands. The pain we give will mean nothing when you before him stand. And as for heaven, well, for once, its grace will be denied.
Another person might have gibbered, pleaded, trembled, cried. But Mrs. Keene just looked around the bench, into the trees, and seeing no shelter or anywhere that she could flee, she opened her arms and challenged them.
Come on, if you will. But remember, my soul is God's and that you cannot kill.
Of course, Ginny was terrified. She had already died. She didn't wish to die again with demons by her side. But if she had to suffer, she would show the strength of men, that the demons would remember who it was had faced them. The demons surged forward, confident of their victory. But something in their path caused them to freeze up instantly. In their path appeared many figures walking on pawed feet. They glowed like irons just taken up from a forge's heat. They hissed and clawed at the demons. Mrs. Keene smiled to see who had come forth to protect her. It was her family. More cats were surrounding her each time she turned around. There was Sir Paws, whom she had rescued from the local pound. He'd lived to a ripe 19 years and been her pride and joy. Moving softly on black-toe beans, her gentle blue-eyed boy. There was Melissa, her white cat, Dina, her ginger girl, and Willa, the witch's cat, with a brown and tawny swirl. There stood her cherub and sweet Drac, her darling vampire boy. Each one faced down the demon horde that wished her to destroy. Some purred when they saw her, and others rubbed against her thigh. Mrs. Keene wished to cuddle them but knew the reason why. She could not now. The cats howled at the dark monsters there. The things swiped back. Growls of warning filled up the chilly air. More arrived then, and even more, 100 cats or so, stood there, the shine from their soft fur making the darkness glow. At last, with a cry that seemed almost to speak,
Go away!
The cats she loved rushed forward, paws flashing, into the fray. Do you fear for the cats? Pray, gentle reader, do not do so. Despite the demon's fearful claws and even more, although deprivation of God's great light had made the demons cruel, not one of the brave souls who entered the fight was a fool. The love the felines bore gave them a strength none could deny. In mere moments, the demons turned on their heels, off to fly. Once every one of the foul, wicked things vanished away. Mrs. Keene's cats swarmed around her to have cuddles and play. Mrs. Keene lost track of just how long she frolicked with them, before an angel, who'd been running late, appeared to them. He led them, a rejoicing crowd, up into the blue sky, where God awaited Mrs. Keene. His praise of her was high, for she had loved his little children, blessed with paws and purr. In return, her father would always show his love to her. Well done, my delicious darlings, for standing bravely beside Mrs. Keene. I'm glad that, in this tale, at least, the subject of our story got the happy ending she deserved. Mrs. Keene's kindness to cats saved her from a great evil. Remember that whenever you meet a creature of fur or feathers, it is my experience that everywhere in the universe, the way you treat others always finds a way to come back to you. Of course, in your case, I am not at all concerned. I am confident you are brave and gentle hearts. So, my lovely ones, thank you again for spending this time with me. Until we meet again, I wish you pleasant dreams and pleasing nightmares. Stay spooky!